Welcome to session 1 of our learning community titled Insights from Lived Experiences, Enhancing Excellence in Provider Care. We want to take a few moments to orient you surrounding what we do here at RMTAC. We are a national resource center and we offer training and technical assistance to behavioral health professionals, organizations, and agencies who are serving or preparing to serve newcomers, including refugees and migrants across the United States and all of its territories. We support with requests from organization in the form of these learning communities that you're attending today, coaching sessions, and webinars. If you're interested at all, please visit us at our website. We are really excited to share space with you all. And with that, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Danielle Bill, and I am a part-time clinical consultant here at RMTAC. I've been a behavioral health service provider in many facets and across various contexts for almost 30 years. I truly have a heart of service for people who live in the margins of our society. So I am thrilled to be able to host this series where we get to hear about the lived experiences of some of these people who are doing the work, and we're so thrilled to be able to learn from them today. So you can read the structure of this particular learning community here, but I want to orient you regarding the discussion today. We want to hear about each participant's pre-migration journey, and later we'll be discussing how they actually migrated to the United States through a panel discussion. We'll have question and answer section later in our session, and we'll have an opportunity to share insights with each other. In our second session, we're going to be discussing our panelists' post-migration journey, so stay tuned for that. As always, should you need a break, please feel free to step away as needed. Now, I'm going to introduce our subject matter experts. First, we have Dr. Mutsa Majera, and she was born and raised in Zimbabwe, and she's lived in the U.S. for the past 21 years. Her experience migrating to the U.S., coupled with her passion for working to break the stigma associated with mental health-related topics within her culture and other minority populations in the U.S., led her to the field of psychology. Dr. Mutsa holds a Bachelor of Science degree from Indiana University, Purdue, at the University of Indianapolis. She holds a Master's of Arts degree in Counseling Psychology from Adler University, and she holds a Doctor of Philosophy degree in International Psychology from the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. Dr. Mutsa has worked as a mental health therapist for the past 12 years with various ages and populations in settings including inpatient, outpatient, college counseling, and most recently, private practice. She joins RMTAC as the lead clinical consultant. Next, we have Dr. Luz Garcini, and she is from Mexico City. Her research, community advocacy, and policy work focuses on identifying, understanding, and addressing the health needs of historically marginalized communities from a biobehavioral and social cultural perspective. I am so impressed with her passion to inform and disseminate mechanisms of risk and resilience in the face of social disadvantage and life adversities. She aims to do so by increasing inclusivity and diversity within science. Currently, she serves as the representative of the National Latinx Psychological Association to the Council of Representatives for the American Psychological Association, otherwise known as the APA, and she's a member of the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Advisory Board to the APA Council. We are thrilled to have Dr. Garcini here with us today. And last, but certainly not least, we have Diana Romero here. Diana is a learning and developmental coordinator here at RMTAC. She has over 15 years of experience in education, content writing, and instructional design. Diana spent the majority of her career in higher education teaching English, which is a subject she's very, very passionate about. Her experience as a refugee fuels her passion for mental health care, education, and refugee advocacy. Diana believes in the power of owning one's story and their own identity. She hopes to inspire others with similar journeys to reclaim their narrative with confidence and with pride. What I can appreciate about each of these women is how they use their lived experiences to inform their work. Similar to myself, I always say that what makes me a really good clinician isn't my formal education, it is my lived experiences. That allows me to sit across from other human beings and fight for social justice. So we are in very good company. Thank you for being here with us and sharing your stories with us today. Of course, none of this could be possible without the hard work and dedication of our team producers. I want to shout them out. The effort that each of them put into ensuring a smooth process for us doesn't go unnoticed. Thank you to Teresa Quintana and Sonia Rollins. Should you have any technical issues, please don't hesitate to reach out to either of them via chat. So today we're going to center and kind of be intentional about centering our listening and focusing on the lived experiences of each of our participants. They're going to share their personal journeys. They're going to offer us insights into how those experiences have shaped their identities and their worldviews as they interact with others across the nation. Recognizing lived experiences as a form of qualitative data is essential to understanding how best to support refugees and migrants. I came to deeply appreciate the value of this data during my own dissertation process, as the type of understanding I sought could not fully be captured through numbers or traditional quantitative analysis. Storytelling is so powerful, and it's such a powerful tool through which communities pass down their knowledge, they preserve their legacies, and they connect across generations. Yeah, within the dominant framework of American culture, these narratives are often overlooked or lost. So, documenting and sharing these lived experiences not only fosters collective healing, but it also plays a critical role in disrupting intergenerational trauma. So, now we're going to hear from our panelists. I'm going to be mediating the conversation and I'm going to be asking some guiding questions. Again, as we set intentions for this space, we're looking to gather various perspectives from each of these women. We hope to facilitate an intimate discussion where you all, the audience, feel like you're a part of this conversation. We will have the chat open, so please share your own insights, experiences, and ask any questions that you feel led to. I'll do my very best to include them as part of the conversation. So if you guys are ready, let's dive in. I'm going to ask each of you, let's start with Dr. Mutsa, share a little bit about yourself, your background. Where are you from? How old you were when you migrated? What circumstances led to your migration, and what you recall feeling or experienced during those circumstances.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Danielle. As noted, my name is Dr. Mutsa Majero. Dr. Danielle did a good job of sharing a bit of my bio and background, at least professional background. But yes, I've been living in the US for the past 22 years now, which is really even just incredible to think how much time has passed. But I migrated from Zimbabwe as a teenager, and this was due to the political unrest that was taking place in the country. It wasn't really something that was planned or expected, at least on my end. It was pretty abrupt, the move. Um, One day I felt like, life was just moving along as ordinary. And the next thing, everything shifted. I was actually in boarding school at the time, and it was one of the best times of my life. So I was enjoying life with my friends, growing up with my best friends. When I went home for a weekend, and my mom basically shared with me that we were leaving in a matter of weeks. So the decision to leave came pretty quickly and with urgency. And, looking back now, I can really see that it was like a really obviously pivotal turning point in my life. So at that age, not only did I not fully understand the politics or even really like the bigger picture, I just knew that things in the country in Zimbabwe were unstable. I could tell that adults were tense. I could tell that there was just like this growing sense of fear and uncertainty even just in conversations that were taking place at school, at home, wherever we were, right? Um, and I remember there being a lot of whispered conversations because if you know anything about the political situation in Zimbabwe, it was just a tense time and you didn't quite know who to trust or, who to talk to about specific things that were taking place. And it was just weird because I would just hear like, oh, this family member or this person I was in school with or this, person that we knew as a neighbor, they would just like abruptly leave the country. Next thing we would hear, oh, they've left the country. They're now living in this different space. So it was really kind of confusing. Um, and so leaving home as suddenly as we did was it was just a whole whirlwind of emotions that I was experiencing. I was just kind of trying to make sense of things as they were changing. And there was a lot of grief, in terms of leaving behind family, friends, and just home in general. And, I was 16 years old at the time. So that's kind of an age or a stage in life where I feel like at least I was kind of feeling like I was beginning to find my footing and find what felt like finding my place in the world. Um, I had a solid group of friends. I had teachers I looked up to. I had routines that were, comforting to me. And I feel like I was starting to really kind of become more confident in who I was becoming. So those years, I feel like those teenage years, they're already like a difficult time that involves a lot of self-discovery and change. So it was really kind of disorienting to be uprooted so suddenly at that age. Um, and I didn't quite have the words to explain what I was experiencing at that time. Um, but when I look back now, again, I feel like grief really is like the main word that stands out for me, or the main feeling or experience that stands out for me. I was really kind of grieving the version of the life that I thought I'd have, like the types of milestones I thought I would share with the people I grew up with. And that comfort of kind of just being known without needing to explain myself. It just kind of was a very lonely experience overall. And it was tough for me to verbalize that at the time because when people did find out that we were leaving, there was this concept of like, oh, you're going to America. I mean, that's the land of opportunity. What are you, there was mixed emotions. Some people were like, what are you sad about? And others understood based on the circumstances. So it was just a lot of confusion and mixed emotions that were taking place for me at that stage. Um, and it's hard to really kind of explain what it's like to carry all of that, like to carry the loss, to carry a lot of like having to silence certain parts of your story because of the circumstances in which we moved. So looking back now, like I said, I really realized how formative that time was, and it really shaped I think my sense of like empathy for others who obviously navigate similar experiences. So as Dr. Danielle shared, as she shared my bio, it's a big part of what led me to the field of psychology and the space of mental health, because I just continuously found myself during that space of like moving, I just continuously found myself in places where I just wanted to connect and be with others who got what I was going through. Um, and the older I got, I feel like the more I just wanted to be that person or that space for others. So that's a little bit about myself, and the circumstances that led me to move to the US.
Thank you for sharing. I'm writing down questions. I have lots of questions. I'll wait till the rest of the panelists respond. But so much comes up as you share that. I'll move through to Dr. Garcini. If you could share a little bit about yourself, your background, um, where you're from, Mexico City. I said that earlier, but how old you were when you migrated, the circumstances that led to the migration, and what feelings do you recall from that time period?
Yes, thank you. I love hearing Dr. Majero's story. And as I was hearing you speak, I was thinking, how are our stories similar and how are they different, right? And I think probably I could say there's more similarity, at least on the feelings of what led us to migrate. So I came to the US when I was in my early 20s, I would say, and I came along with my two kids. So as a very young mother, I had my daughter when I was 16 and my son a year later. I dropped out of high school just to become a mom and a housewife, right? And ironically, given my culture and given there's so many women in my family, I was the first one to ever kind of step into leaving the country. I never thought that I wanted to pursue anything else, right? For me, it was building a family and giving the safety and security to my kids. And all that got shaken up when we actually encountered some unfortunate circumstances with the organized crime. And all of a sudden, I realized that I couldn't even leave the house because I was being watched and I was being followed. And that was at the point that I started thinking, what's going to happen with my kids? So at that point, I had a distant uncle and aunt who I wasn't close to, right? I mean, I think I saw them maybe when they came to visit Mexico when I was younger. But all of a sudden, at the time, the father of my kids said, why don't you go and stay with them for a little bit until things calm down or until they lose sight of us? And at that point, I remember, I still remember vividly how like the room looked, what I said to him. It's so funny, right? How trauma kind of embeds in us. And I remember I looked at him and I was like, what are you talking about? I'm not going anywhere. And he said, if not for you, for the kids. And that's when he struck the chord, right? I think if it was for me, I would have never come here because it's not easy. But when he touched on the values that rooted me as to what my purpose in life was, which was protecting my kids, then there was no doubt in my mind. We didn't have any money. So I remember I came to the United States with $500 that we got borrowed from different places. I came here via bus, right, which was very scary with two little kids. And I was young myself. I didn't speak any English. So that was the other thing like I said, I was a high school dropout. So it's like, what am I going to do? How am I going to work? I was a housewife, right? So there was, for me, the feeling was an overwhelming sense of uncertainty that triggered a massive anxiety and panic attacks. I mean, I remember being in that bus, like not being able to breathe and having panic attacks and thinking, I'm just going to die here. And now what's going to happen with my kids, right? I have my kids right here. Who's going to take care of them? So that was terrifying. And then I alternated between that and a lot of anger. I was very angry for having to do something that I didn't want it to do, but that I had to do to survive. And I think I carried that anger for a very long time. However, though, it was interesting because I do remember, I grew up in with the Catholic nuns, and I do remember uh, always one that would say, you never a victim of your circumstances, right? Never live your life thinking of yourself as a victim. So that was the thing that in my mind was like, at the same time that I was afraid and angry, I was like, you got this. You got this. And somehow the resilience piece pushes you through, right? And now when I go back and look at that, if it was that experience that grounded me into my purpose and meaning of what I do today, whether it's my clinical work, whether it's mostly my research and my advocacy, because I feel then like again, it becomes your superpower because you realize how strong and beautifully made we are to withstand any circumstance and to learn and to adapt and to be able to move forward, right? So sometimes if we just trust the process, it becomes easier. But that was a process for me.
Thank you for sharing that. I think the thing that stood out as you were speaking, is you at a young age, and maybe because you were older and you had embarked on the journey of motherhood, is that you were rooted in your values, and that kind of led you throughout the journey. I want to talk more about that as we continue this conversation, but that really struck a chord with me. Now moving on to our next panelist, Diana. I'm so interested to hear your story. So share a little bit about yourself, where you're from, how old you were when you migrated, the circumstances surrounding your migration, and any feelings that arose as a result of your experiences.
Thank you, Dr. Danielle, and thank you to Dr. Mutsa and Dr. Garcini, because I think, like you had mentioned, Dr. Garcini, there a lot of the feelings that come up are very similar, and we all kind of find ways to process those things in our own individual experience. So it's very interesting to hear from both. So my name is Diana, and I am originally from Banja Luka, Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is in the southern part of Europe, southeastern part of Europe. My family immigrated to the US in May of 1998. I was just about 9 years old at the time. So my understanding of the migration journey is a little different because I was so young, but I did process it in my own way as well. So the main reason we came to the US was because of religious persecution. So if you're familiar with the war and what was going on in that area, the Balkan War was a war between Christians and Muslims, and essentially over land. So that continues to be a reoccurring theme kind of in our history, unfortunately. And when the war began, my family was the victim of a hate crime. And so specifically our next door neighbor, so how Dr. Mutsa mentioned, there's kind of a fear of your neighbor, fear of the people around you that you've known most of your life. Our next door neighbors held a gun to my and my grandmother's head when I think I was like about 4.5 years old at the time. And he threatened us with a bunch of racial slurs and ways that he was planning to kill us because we weren't the same religion as him and we were living in this land. And thankfully, my mom owned a cafe that was underneath our house. And my grandmother told me, okay, when I count to three, run down there and try to get help. So she counted and I ran to the cafe, and a lot of police officers would come there and have their lunch. And thankfully, they were there having lunch at the cafe. So they went and helped my grandmother at the time. So that kind of was the reason that we left. But shortly after that, the army made its way into our city, and they were bombing a lot of houses. There was a lot of fire, like people's houses were being lit on fire. So my family was then forced to flee. We just packed a small bag of belongings, and surprisingly, we left in a horse-drawn carriage, which as a kid I thought was like a really cool adventure at the time. And I remember coming to the US and playing the game Oregon Trail and being like, yeah, I did that. Like I did the actual Oregon Trail, but in a different country. So I guess that's kind of one of the positive ways that as a kid I made the experience understandable for myself. But I do remember just being very scared and not really understanding what was going on. And everything to me felt like it was temporary. I guess because you're a kid, it feels like the time is not forever. And I remember leaving our house and getting into the horse-drawn carriage and being like, oh, okay, we're gonna come back. Like thinking that we were going to come back, not really understanding that we would never go back to that house. Like, even, now that home is no longer occupied by anybody within our religion. So I didn't understand that. And I thought of it all as like some kind of fun adventure in some way, like to make sense of it. Like made up little stories for myself. Like I'm going on an adventure, and we're like, I would make up little themes and stories along the way to just like make it more fun and to kind of understand it and make sense of it. But I remember being very, very scared and being confused and feeling kind of lonely because my dad was drafted and he was forced to join the military. And I didn't understand how long he was going to be going away. So as we caravan through the different cities, people would offer us food and like try to give us things so we had enough for our journey. And I remember this lady gave me a piece of cake, and I was like super excited about the piece of cake. And I told the lady and my mom that I wasn't going to eat the cake because I'm going to give it to my dad. So I was saving it for my dad. And come to find out, I wouldn't see my dad for like over 2 years. So there was just those little things of me trying to hold on to my childhood at the time and trying to like keep those parts of myself. Although I understood that the situation was scary, I was mostly trying to just still be a kid during that process. So that's kind of my experience.
Thank you for sharing that. I should probably preface that I am very emotional. And as I'm continuing to listen to your stories, emotions might get the best of me because I am human. I recognize the effort that it must take to share your stories with us. So, again, thank you. Um, some themes that came up as I was listening to you three are surrounding the intense emotions that you remember, grief, anger, and being scared. As you were talking, Diana, and thinking about little Diana, I have a question surrounding what life did you envision? Like I know Dr. Mutsu, you mentioned that you had envisioned at 16 a life, and you had envisioned a life for yourself, Dr. Garcini. But what did that look like prior to migration, right? So what dreams did you have for your younger selves? And we won't talk about how it shapes today because we're going to save that for later in the conversation. But I am curious about what dreams you held as your younger selves.
I can go first since um, I was so young, but a lot of my childhood was spent outdoors. So I spent a lot of and which is funny because I love the outdoors now, but I would spend all my days like at my grandmother's house, playing in the river, picking poppies, like little poppy flowers, and taking them to my grandma. And my grandma had a garden with a bunch of different things in it. But I remember always picking the carrots before they were ready and just like eating them with dirt. So at the time, that was what I envisioned, playing with my friends and eating dirt covered carrots from my grandmother's garden.
I love that. I love the visual of little Diana just kind of eat with the stems attached, with the green, stems attached. I love that image.
I love that, Diana. I do too. I think similar to what you shared, growing up in Zimbabwe, we spent a lot of time outdoors too. So, and we spent a lot of time with family, always surrounded by family. And like I said, I was in boarding school at the time, so I was like growing up with my best friends, right? I absolutely loved it. And when I would come home for the holidays, we would be surrounded by family. So I just always envisioned this, or just had dreams of being able to raise my potential family in that same type of like space and environment. But then obviously when it was like we're moving, I'm like, I have no idea what that future now looks like. Um, so it was very, again, like I said, disorienting because it's like, wait, I'm supposed to be growing up with these people. I'm supposed to be living this type of life, like the way that my parents raised me. It was kind of like the blueprint. I was like, oh yeah, this is how my life is going to play out. So it was very disorienting, kind of trying to shift that dream of what the future would be. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate both of you looking back. I think for me, I come from a broken family. So I lost my father when I was 2 years old. And then my mom remarried, and the situation at home was not good at all. So I kind of grew up without a sense of family. So my purpose in life was I'm going to be the best nuclear family I can for my kids, right? So when this happened, that became shutter, right? Because the father of my kids had to be he was left behind. So here I am taking off with the kids, and it's like, are we gonna get back together? Are you gonna be safe, right? Because you're still gonna be embedded in that environment. But we just didn't have the money to be able to migrate all together, or even the legal documents to be able to do it. So that was very painful. And I needed to know that at least for some time I was going to have to be stepping into the role of mother and father in my really early 20s. And it was very scary. And then the thought of like, what happens if something happens to the father of my children, right? There goes my story again. We're gonna repeat the same thing. So it was very awkward. So I left with similar to what Dr. Romero is saying, right? With the idea that I'm gonna go back. This is just a temporary thing. And I think that's what helped me survive, thinking that is just for 6 months, is just for, and then the time can go in longer and longer and longer, right? But we always hold on to this is temporary and is going to go back to the dream that I had. And holding on to those ideals, to those values, to those dreams is what keeps us moving forward.
Thank you. That was excellent. Thank you for sharing that. Did any of you guys have any knowledge or concept of America? I know we kind of develop a cultural awareness right outside of our little bubbles that we live in as children, but did any of you have an understanding of America or what was ahead of you?
I can go. So, in the only sense I understood of America was just like TV, which was Hollywood. And my understanding of what it was going to look like when we came to the US, once I understood that we were coming, was that like I would have a huge house with like a chandelier and a winding staircase. Like the chandelier, guys, was the thing that I would lay at night imagining this chandelier that I would have in my home as a kid. So that was my only understanding of America as a kid, was that everybody had a chandelier in their homes. So
I can speak for myself. I think for me, what I've heard from early young is like the family split. The family is everywhere. So you don't want to go there, right? That's what they're not like they're not in the same family way. La familia no se queda junta, right? They're all spread out and then the family is never together. So it was very scary. That is the biggest stereotype that I think I can remember.
Yeah, I think I have a mix of both of your experiences. I think TV too, definitely shaped what I envisioned, and then landing in the Detroit airport and then driving out, I was like, this doesn't look like what I thought it was gonna look like. Um, but aside from that too, I think there was also, there was just all of this, lots of like fear of like, oh my gosh, America is also very violent, and there's all kinds of like you could end up on drugs, and just again this African parent mentality and saying sometimes, but also I had a sister who was here in school, and so she kind of helped kind of just shape a little bit of what I knew, at least just from her sharing just like what school was like or what she was experiencing. But it was a lot of just like she was, a student trying to make a way for herself. So she was working a lot. So it was also the concept of like, okay, you got to really, really work hard. So I had a mix. I mean, I was just confused when I arrived. It just did not quite match what I thought it was going to be.
Thanks for sharing that with us. I was curious about that because so much of who we grow up to are shaped by our perceptions and interactions during that time. So I was very curious about how that shaped yours. Okay, we're gonna kind of pause for a moment, give you guys all a chance to kind of breathe and readjust, and we're gonna move to audience participation. We really want to hear from you all. How do your lived experiences of your clients compare to the ones that you heard today? What similarities or differences can you identify in the people that you're serving? I'm going to put that in the chat. So if you guys want to write in the chat or if you want to unmute yourself, feel free to share. religious persecution. So sold properties and land, knowing, so there was a knowledge of not being able to return, gang violence, military. So needing to leave to come to America or migrate to another place to be able to support their families financially. Better opportunities. Thank you all for sharing. Education. Political asylum. Yeah, this concept around education can be very nuanced. But yeah, that's such an important kind of access to privilege in America that I don't think is considered enough. FGM, I don't know if it's pronounced Jacinta. Can you clarify what FGM is? Thank you for sharing. A kind of a female, oh, thank you. Female genital mutilation. So personal violence. Thank you for sharing that. So another question that comes to mind is, if one of our panelists were your own clients, what would you want to explore further in your sessions with them? I'll post that in the chat for your consideration as well. Thank you for clarifying that, Jacinta. If one of these panelists were your own clients, what would you want to explore further in your sessions with each of them? I think if I can take the liberty while you guys are all thinking, something that came up. I think Dr. Garcini indicated that she carried the anger with her for a very long time. I was curious about what healing looked like in terms of resolving some of these intense emotions that came up. But surrounding grief, specifically, I'm curious about whether or not you were able to relinquish kind of guilt, or if guilt came up for the people who were left behind. And I guess for each of you, as you guys were fleeing for safety in various kind of contexts, was guilt a part of the emotions that came up for the people who couldn't migrate with you all? I think that was something that was kind of glaring as I was listening to your stories.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. For me, the anger turned into motivation and overachievement, right? Then I was swing the other way. Um, and kind of that piece of resilience that, okay, this is not gonna tear me down, right? I'm gonna keep building this. And then the sense of hope also, that eventually the sense of home for family reunification is so big. And I see this constantly on the stories of the so many participants that we would talk to in our research. So I think kind of helping people find that path of resilience and to keep that light of hope alive can help you overcome all those sense of grief, anger, anxiety. I also tend to reflect a lot from a strength-based perspective, that if you survive conditions like this, everything else is easy, right? And I often said it, people say, well, why do you make such bold decisions? Like, for instance, right, recently when someone says, well, you can go this early for tenure, you're not ready. And it takes you to give steps that I wouldn't otherwise if I didn't have my story, because it helps you realize that I gamble with everything I had, right? And eventually it turning out for the best. I can do it again. And if you carry that mindset in your life, it helps you move forward. So in a lot of the participants or the clients that I had that are immigrants, is tapping and helping them remember that it's the strength that I have carried them, right? That they have survived 100% of their hardest days, and that they will continue to do so because they have the skills to do it.
Yes, as we continue to further this conversation, I'm probably going to ask you to restate that and restate it even louder for the people in the back because it's such an important part of our current circumstances. So we will revisit that point exactly, Dr. Garcina, and I'm very excited when we get there. To you, Dr. Mutsa and Diana, any thoughts surrounding whether or not guilt kind of came up as a result of you being able to flee and where you originated, the people in those countries weren't able to?
Yes. Oh, sorry, Dave. I can definitely relate because even though I said that this was really abrupt for me, there was a lot of planning on my mom's part, my parents' part. Um, and it's not easy to kind of go through all of those steps to eventually like move, right? And I consider it a privilege to have been able to even do so. There weren't many that were able to leave the circumstances that were really terrible. So there definitely was guilt in that space of like, okay, you get to leave. That's why I was saying, like when I was leaving, I was crying, I was distraught. I didn't want to leave. But there were people, family members that were looking at us like, what, why are you crying? Like this is, you're getting the opportunity to leave. So it was a mix of grief and guilt. And I think grief is it still kind of just like stays with you, even though I'm now at a place where, you know, I was granted asylum and things are kind of I've been able to go back to Zimbabwe, but we've lost family members while we were here and not able to go home and bury those family members. So, and there were those family members looking to us for that support to grieve and to bury those that we have lost. So that mix of grief and guilt still kind of like exists, but definitely what Dr. Garcini said in terms of there's also that like that grief, that guilt, that anger, that frustration. It also really does drive you to say, okay, here I am again in this space where I can kind of make something of myself. It does definitely drive you to be like, oh, my parents didn't do this for nothing, right? They made these sacrifices, so we have to make the best of it. Tap into education, tap into getting to a place where we can then support that those that weren't able to leave. So yeah, it's a
Thank
lot
you.
of emotions.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Before we move on, Diana, did you have anything to add?
I would say it's very similar, right? Like Dr. Mutsa and Dr. Garcini, there is this sense of leaving people behind, right? For me, it was my grandmother. She was really close to me. And when we were granted permission to come to the US, she wasn't allowed to be a part of the group that left. So I had a really hard time letting go of my grandmother. And then there was the other side of it where my mom was experiencing a lot of the guilt, and I would see her processing that guilt while she was here, leaving her family behind, while there was still a lot of instability and war going on. So her not knowing where my grandmother was, or not knowing where my aunt was, not knowing if they were alive, because at the time, you know, the only way that you could communicate was through letters in the mail. So long distance calling was super expensive. So not knowing where our family was, that was really hard. And so I kind of took the same path as Dr. Mutsa with like my parents did this for a reason. Like I have to do the best to be the best at everything. I took it kind of to the extreme in a lot of ways because I didn't want their sacrifices to be for nothing. So I would say that was my experience.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. It definitely puts into perspective, I think, the weight of what you have to carry as you're transitioning. So, switching gears a little bit, moving back to kind of diving into each of your stories, we want to get a little bit more specific surrounding what the actual migration journey was like. And so, I think I understood, Dr. Mutsa, you arrived by plane. Diana, you arrived through the, we're going to call it the Bosnia Trail on a horse-drawn carriage, and Dr. Garcini, you were on bus. Can you tell us a little bit about the specifics about that? Right, how were transitions like during that process? And what do you recall about actually arriving into the United States and kind of navigating that time?
Yes, so it was actually traumatic at another level. So one of the things that I missed in the beginning of my story is that I was an anchor baby. So kind of like by some ironic mistake, I was actually born in the United States, but I was taken back because my mother was traveling here when I was born. So I had U.S. citizenship, right? But I never grew up here. I mean, I was back in Mexico the day that I was like 2 months old or something like that. I don't know. But to me, it was just like never in my mind, right? Except when we had to flee, right? And at that point, I had my 2 kids. So I remember trying to find a way, how am I going to make this through? And this is why I did it via bus also, because it was cheaper. So I remember going to the American Embassy. In the American Embassy, at that point, they didn't have dual citizenship. So they asked me to go and I had to resign the Mexican citizenship. So they stripped me out of my Mexican citizenship, and and the minute they stamp my passport, they say you have 72 hours to leave. So it was horrible, right? Because at some point I was like, but that is not even my citizenship. And now I have to leave my country. What did I just do? That was the whole time in my mind. It was, what did I just do? And how am I going to come back? But I was in such a survival mode that I just didn't even think about that. Um, so that bus ride was just horrific, a lot of panic attack. I couldn't breathe. I had panic attacks for a very long time. I did not know what it was at that point, but my kids kept me going. And I do remember my aunt picking me up at the bus station, an aunt that I haven't I didn't even remember what she looked like, right? And it's funny how these things become embedded in our sensory memory. I remember the smells. I remember the colors. I mean, everything's so vivid that still throws kind of goosebumps all over my body when I think about it. But yeah, that was my process.
Thank you for that. You mentioned it earlier, and you just mentioned it again, and I made a note. Trauma does have a way of embedding itself into our senses, and so it's no surprise that it comes through in smells and our tactile experiences and what we see and what we hear, and so thank you for that. I think it's a gentle reminder that we may not remember things that we necessarily saw, but we can remember the smells or the way something felt as we were experiencing trauma. And so thank you for that
And
reminder.
I think it's also important to think, right? Why oftentimes our first reaction is avoidance as we're dealing with clients, right, that had trauma or that are still embedded in trauma. The first thing to do is avoid, because those are very powerful emotions. And if you don't have all those skills to be able to deal with those memories, it can just be really hard.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Dr. Mutso, Diana, do one of you guys want to share the specifics surrounding the migration journey itself?
I'll go ahead. So I feel like my migration journey was so long because, from the moment the war started and then fleeing our home and then arriving, we went through the caravan, we arrived in another city, and we kind of had to stay there for a while, because there were blockades and all these other cities that were on fire and the war was actively going on. So our goal was to get to the capital city, which is where my aunt lived, because the violence was a little bit less intense there. But on the way there, we stopped at this other city, which we didn't know how long we were going to be there for, but we were in a refugee camp, for a while. I think like 6 months. And then after the refugee camp, our families were quartered with families within the city. So essentially, our family was just put into somebody else's home and they were told now they're going to live with you, which I'm sure isn't comfortable for them. And then it wasn't comfortable for us being in someone else's home. So we were there for like about a year. So this is all a year and a half into the process. And then during that process of living in the refugee camp, my family had the opportunity to apply to come to the US. But that opportunity to actually come didn't arrive probably for another year and a half. So all together, that was a whole 3-year process just to get to that point of, okay, that's an opportunity. But I do remember hearing my parents whispering about going to the US and like having those hushed conversations. But for me, it just felt like such a distant place. Like I mentioned earlier, it felt like Hollywood movies is all I understood about the US. And it didn't seem like a place where we would belong or that like we were meant to be there. And I remember, like, as the date came closer of us flying and knowing we were going to leave, in my mind, we were just going on a quick trip. Like, we're gonna go there for a little bit and we're gonna come back and see my parents, see my grandparents, my grandmother, and see my friends. And we were gonna be there for a little bit and then we were gonna come back as soon as the war was kind of settled down. And so that was my thought of all of that. And I just remember seeing my parents really, and mostly my mom, crying a lot. And I remember my mom had just had my little sister, not too long before that. And so I remember her crying and holding my little sister, and you could see all the heaviness that she was carrying through that process of like leaving her family. And so my thing was like, I just want to be as good as possible. I want to be the goodest girl so my mom doesn't have to worry about me. So through that process, I was just like, I'm going to be the best. I'm going to be such a helper. And I helped my mom with as much as possible because I didn't want her to have any more stress than what was on her plate at the time. And I guess if I could share, the first thing I remember about arriving in the US was when we went through the Red Cross and the Catholic Charities. So once they brought us into the US, they took us grocery shopping. And I remember being so overwhelmed by how much food there was. Because food was like very scarce during the war, and we mostly survived on like bread, rice, and potatoes. Like, I don't think I ate meat that whole time. I was probably anemic. Um, so I remember seeing all the food in the grocery stores and just being in like disbelief at how big the aisles were and how much food there was, and knowing that like we didn't have access to food at all. And it felt like my own personal heaven. I remember being like, oh my gosh, like this is all like I can eat all of this. And as a kid, I thought all the food was free, so that was fun. So there was like a sense of overwhelm and also excitement to have access to food. And I remember our first night sleeping in the apartment. It definitely didn't have a chandelier like I imagined. Um, it was a one-bedroom apartment. We didn't even have beds. We slept on the floor, and there were lots of cockroaches. So I remember just like chasing them around and seeing my little sister chasing the cockroaches around. And yeah, that was our first night in the US.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm later I'll kind of try to remember to ask this, but the perspective from a young child and like a fierce, determined mama and, a teenager who can kind of shape what their future looks like. It's so interesting to kind of situate ourselves in those kind of experiences as you describe them. So thank you, Diana. Dr. Mutza, anything to add to the conversation as it relates to your immigration journey?
Yes. So like I noted earlier, I arrived by plane at the Detroit airport. And I remember, again, very similar to what Dr. Carcini said, I could remember distinct smells and again, looking out the window and saying, this doesn't look like what I thought it was going to look like. Um, and I think there was a mix of like nervousness and excitement, right? Because we had some family that was here. And like I said, my sister was here in school, so she was the one coming to pick us up from the airport. So there was a bit of excitement of, okay, I'm going to be reunited with my sister. But I remember getting to you had to, to declare political asylum, you have to declare it like right, well, at that time, and I think some processes are different now, but you had to declare right when you arrive at the airport. Um, so, like I said, I kind of knew what was going on politically in the country and everything, but I remember my mom, I may have been feeling some excitement and mixed with nervousness, but for my mom, it was all just nervousness. It was all nervousness, fear, worry, grief. Um, so I remember her handing over paperwork and all of this to like the immigration people at the airport. And that's when it kind of became real, like, oh my gosh, like we really are like, this is us declaring, stating that we're seeking asylum. And it kind of like sank in like, oh yeah, all of that was going on back home. It just made everything a lot more real. So I remember that excitement kind of getting off of the plane and being like, okay, I'm going to be seeing my sister. I'm in America. It kind of shifted a little bit right when we got to that space of like, okay, now you have to basically say like you're seeking asylum. Um, so I feel like the whatever excitement I may have felt was really just that novelty wore off pretty quickly in that space. And I also did feel like, oh, this is temporary. We're going to come back to Zimbabwe in in some years or so. But it was just a weird experience. But I can remember specific smells within the airport. It was busy. It was kind of chaotic. It was a lot going on. So yeah, so that was a bit about at least like my initial arrival.
Specifically, Dr. Mutsa, do you remember anything that felt good? And the reason I'm asking this is because as I listened to Diana's story, because she had this very childlike kind of perception, I wonder if there was, and you too, Dr. Gersini, I wonder if there was anything that you remember feeling excited about, or if there was any positive emotions attached to your experience.
Uh, I think I can relate to the food part with Diana. Like stepping out and like shortly after arriving, going to the grocery store, being overwhelmed by just this abundance of just options, like specifically cereal. I liked cereal at the time, and just like I was like, how is it that there's like aisles and aisles and aisles to choose from? So I remember the food part was, there was that excitement, and then of course, like I said, being reunited with my sister who was here in school, and then also just knowing that I was going to see some other family members. So I think that those are like the family piece and just that, being 16 and just wanting to eat all kinds of things. That was exciting.
I appreciate the conversation. I
Ariel.
guess
Oh, sorry.
perhaps for me, I was older. So, and it's interesting, right? I can't remember anything that made me feel better. It started to get better a year later when the father of my kids joined us, right? That's when I was like, okay, it's gonna be okay. But I remember just hating everything, right? And having to kind of push forward for the kids. But even the food for me was not like no, this is just not good, right? What is these cans? We don't have, we didn't eat canned food, and that's all that was there. The cheese stayed different. Even the chicken looked different. The color of the chicken was different. And I was like, what is this? What's happening? Hated, and up to this day, the air conditions, I cannot stand air conditions, right? So everything was just hard.
Something that's resonating with me because you were the oldest in your journey, and I keep mentioning this, so forgive my perseveration, but you were a mama, right? Like determined to kind of and seeping with the value of protecting your children, and you loved your country very, very much, and anger, you had talked about. So I'm as I'm imagining you being here, I imagine that it was difficult for you to find any sort of comfort in this process if you were like moving through intense bouts of anger. So thank you for sharing that specifically. Anything to add to that, Dr. Garcini, as I'm reflecting and kind of sitting in what that must have felt like?
Yeah, thank you. I think it'll be interesting, and we have done this, right? Because my daughter and I are not that different in age. We kind of grew up together because I had her very young, and we've done panels when we speak both of us of our different experience, how she came as a child. And she has talked about those positive memories of the things she saw. And one of them was so beautiful to describe, that the first time that she went to a daycare, she started seeing diversity of people. In Mexico, the diversity is not based on ethnicity and race, right? It's more socioeconomic status diversity. But all of a sudden, it was the first time that she has seen kids of Asian background or Black kids. And I remember she looking at me like smiling big, right? Seeing all of these kids that were different to her. And she would look at her skin and she would look at the kids. And I was just terrified. It was just like, but I guess the stories, right, that they tell in their mind, in their eyes of innocence, of discovery, whereas perhaps for us, older generations, uh, we see it more with the eyes of fears and caution and loss.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, it really, I think, brings into sharp focus and perspective where each of you were as you were forming your identity. So I do a lot of identity work, right? Cultural identity, religious identity, right? All the intersections that we hold as humans. And so each of your perspectives, vary based on where you were in your identity development, which is very fascinating to kind of conceptualize. Going back to you, Dr. Mutsa, what was your favorite cereal, if you don't mind sharing?
I remember it was Captain Crunch, and I cannot stand it now. It was just, lots of sugar, and oh, I
Yeah,
shudder just thinking about
that's
it.
And they
you.
only had the blue one, right? Because now they have all these flavors. They only had the blue one.
Yes, well, I think it was, I remember like a blue, like, what do you call it? Like
Package.
box. Yeah, but it was like this golden color. Oh my gosh, it was just so good then.
Diane, do you have a favorite food that you remember?
I don't remember like a specific food, but I had a similar experience to what Dr. Mutsa said with food, because like we didn't have access to fresh fruit and veggies a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
So when we came, my mom would buy like bananas were like exotic. Like oh my God, bananas are so readily available and they were not very expensive. So my mom would buy bananas all the time, and I
Yeah.
can't find bananas now. So similar thing.
Yeah. even as you were talking and kind of thinking about the differences between your 9-year-old self and Dr. Garcini's 20-year-old self, her being kind of removed from a culture that had shaped her identity, including food, where you experienced, it sounds like, severe food insecurities, right? So even and we all know the differences between American food and foods across the globe. So even thinking about what that would, the adjustment that it would take, even just to consume, right, what we need on a daily basis, and how we have to contend with the relationship with the food that we have access to is something I had never really considered. So thank you for sharing that. As we kind of move through this discussion, another thing that comes up is, from your perspectives then, what did support look like as you settled into America? So you were talking about having to live with roaches, Diana, as a child, right? And so I'm curious about what your idea about support looked like in America. And for each of you, if you guys can kind of take us through your understanding at that time during your process.
I can go. So I think support looked very different from what my parents had and then what I had. And I think for me, because I was a kid, my parents didn't tell me much about what was happening, you know? And so I felt like a lot of times I didn't know what was going on. And I felt very lonely in that process as a kid. I just remember feeling a lot of loneliness. But the apartments that we were put in through Catholic Charities, there was a lot of refugees and migrants in those apartments. And a lot of our support came from other refugees and migrants. I remember the first day we arrived, because we had no furniture, we didn't have a bed, I didn't have any toys. I remember everybody in the apartments kind of gathered together and brought toys, brought a dresser, brought a table, like tried to like gather what they had in their homes and to make it a home for us. So that, I think, peer support was a big thing. You know, you have to consider my parents had nobody here, no family, no anybody that was from their hometown to rely on. So anybody that gave us anything was very pivotal in like helping us settle into that experience. And I remember going to school shortly after we arrived and not speaking any English. And then I didn't know how to like say I need to go to the bathroom, or I would just stand there like acting like I had to pee so my teacher would know that I needed to go. But I remember one of my teachers, she found another girl that was from my country, and she spoke English perfectly because they had been there for a few years. And my teacher paired me with her, kind of like we sat next to each other. She was my little buddy, and she helped me kind of integrate into the school. So that was really helpful, just being able to have somebody like that. And 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 I know my parents, my mom like did like some schooling on how to like do a resume, how to get a job. That was through I think through Catholic Charities and other organizations. So that support they relied heavily on to get them to, you know, like to integrate into the US society. But I think the biggest challenge was like we didn't speak the language. So trying to navigate that and trying to get the support in that way was hard. And I think that's probably changed, right? Like now there's more accessibility to all these other options, technology even, where when we came, you know, we were still sending letters by paper to reach out to people. So there's definitely a difference there. So I think the support came in those two facets.
Thank you. Dr. Gersini or Dr. Mutsa, do you feel led to share?
Yeah, thank you. Similarly, right? I think for me, it was an organization that was Family Outreach Fort Bend, and getting close to other migrant families, you felt like, okay, you get what I'm going through, right? Particularly for other parents, was particularly helpful. And for me, the other one that was at that time, we had calling cards, right, that you can buy. calling home, it just felt like it was the highlight of my week. I couldn't do it that often because, I couldn't afford the calling cards and they were very expensive. But it was just knowing that at the end of the week, I could call home, that I could call him, right? And we will talk until the minutes run out, right? Um, that was a huge thing to remind me that you got this, right? We're still connected, even though we're far. And I think also going back to being around other immigrants is starting to remember what home is like. In the building that sense of cultural pride, right? Speaking your language with other people, right? Um, that is definitely the support that helped me carry through the first years when I got here.
So for you, it was really a matter of you outreaching. It was a matter of you kind of seeking safety and connections to other migrants and home. And thank you for sharing that, Dr. Mutsa. And you called to remembrance calling cards because that was, yeah, they were very important part of our independence, I guess. So
We
thank you
didn't have
for
we
that.
didn't have WhatsApp, we didn't have cell phones. I mean, it's like now I'm thinking like, how did we do it without cell phones?
Yeah,
It
that
was
calling cards,
it
yeah.
was so interesting. I mean, I'm much older than you are, but I don't remember ever seeing a computer. I
Yeah.
saw my first time I saw a computer was in the United States, and I was like, what is that? Right? So technology was at a different level, right? And
Yeah.
we talk to our immigrant communities about those things. The technological divide is so
Yeah.
big.
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
talk about that.
Two things. The calling cards had like 50 numbers that you had to like put in,
Yes.
right? So I'm remembering that. And I remember probably, I don't know because you were so young, Diana, but you came around the 90s, the late 90s, and that's when I was introduced to a computer on my school campus. And I remember thinking like, this is never going to take off. Like we will always write letters to each other using pen and pencil, and look at us now like having these big discussions online. But sorry, I digress, and thank you for divulging me kind of going back into my own memory. Dr. Mutsa, anything to add to the discussion?
Yeah, I think very similar to Diana and Dr. Garcini. When I think back on support systems after arriving, I think the most meaningful support, it didn't really come from professional services. It really came from the community. Um, it was, like I said, the family members that we had. Thankfully, there was a pretty significant Zimbabwean community in Lansing, Michigan, where we first arrived or we first settled. So that was really helpful too, just being around other Zimbabweans who connected us also to other Africans and other immigrants overall. There were also church members who offered us rides, or I remember they helped us like go shopping for winter coats because they were like, okay, it's about to be, really cold. We knew nothing about snow, and I just really distinctly remember wanting to buy this like white puffy coat, and my mom was like, "That's gonna get dirty so soon," and they were like, "Let her do what she wants." That's a story that really sticks out in my mind. But yeah, it was a lot of community support. But I do remember going into some professional spaces where we had to go, like file paperwork and all kinds of things. And I was enrolled in school pretty quickly after arriving. And those were spaces where it felt a little bit harder to, or there was just a lot more like emotional distance in those spaces. There were a lot of like barriers, paperwork, confusing systems. And then one of the biggest barriers in some of those professional spaces was just assumptions that were made about us that made it hard for us to connect. I think we were somewhat advantaged because we grew up speaking English, so our English was fluent. So that wasn't necessarily one of the barriers, but just those assumptions of, oh, you're African and all these other things that kind of come with that. But yeah, it was really the informal relationship type of like networks that we formed that really helped us because being able to see others who looked like me, other immigrants who had moved and were kind of like doing well for themselves or, somewhat established, that helped me feel like, okay, maybe we can do this. So that was really helpful. And I think just reflecting on that and hearing Diana and Dr. Garcini speak, it just really or drives home that idea that like support doesn't have to be clinical to be effective, right? It's just those connections, and especially for immigrant populations, having something that's really culturally rooted, just familiarity of people who look like you, who get what you're going through. That's just key. It's vital.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. As I'm kind of just feeling exceptionally overwhelmed to be sitting in the center of your stories. And again, what's resonating with me is the differences in perspectives and adjustment based on who you were at the time, and also the resources that were available to you as a child, Diana, specifically, right? And then it makes me think of your two children, Dr. Garcina, and what their experiences were like, and if they felt like they had an abundance of resources versus the adults who were really left to kind of seek out these opportunities for connection and support. Again, not something that I fully conceptualized as I'm supporting, but it offers a very real and nuanced kind of understanding of what support can look like at various levels, right? Or various or people migrating at various ages. So thank you for providing those kind of nuanced and detailed
Wait, I
experiences.
want to touch base on something that
Please.
Anna mentioned, and it's so interesting, right, with the generations. You mentioned, right, when you were going to school, and because you didn't speak English, that you needed to go to the restroom, right, and you needed to move. And it reminded me, I took my mind to my daughter. So for the first, I think it was 2 weeks, she would come wet, right, because she did not know how to ask. And as a parent, right now hearing you talk, I was just like, I hear you, I see you, right? But as a parent, it was painful. It was painful for me to think my kid can't communicate. Imagine what it is all day long for a little girl not being able to convey their needs, right? So that was really, really painful. So I see you, Diana. I hear you.
Thank you for sharing that. So we're going to kind of shift gears a bit, and we're going to ask for audience participation. I'm going to put in the chat some questions that we want to kind of encourage you all to participate in. How might the age of your own client's migration affect their migration experiences, similar to what we've been talking about here? What support systems or approaches have you all found to be helpful in assisting your clients with their resettlement process? I'm going to put those in the chat, and if you feel led to share, we'd love to hear from you. Coping. Yeah, we heard through our panelists that we may not necessarily have coping skills. Similar to what Dr. Garcini was sharing, it sounds like she didn't necessarily have the skill set, but she had the motivation. That drive kind of propelled her to move into action. Vocabulary. Yeah. Yeah, we just had a really very real palpable example of how vocabulary and ability to express thoughts, emotions, needs, right, can affect what that process is. Food. Yeah. So Esther is suggesting that using local cultural and religious communities. Yeah, something that stood out as the panelists were talking was because this was years ago, even, as late or early as the late 90s, and how much our support systems have grown even in the past 20 or 30 years. I was thinking about those differences. Cultural liaisons, interpreters, huge. other refugees who've lived in the US. One of the things I'm really grateful for since 2020 is our cultural awareness in the United States as a result of the global pandemic and all the things that we learned during that time. But there's this cultural awareness that I think we didn't have access to prior. So finding other people who share some of our intersections and identities has been monumental in just being seen, right? And feeling seen and feeling heard. School supports, ESL teachers, excellent recommendations. Another question I have for you guys in the audience, and I'm also going to put this in the chat, is how have some of you navigated negative impressions, right? So I imagine like Dr. Garcini, who has an immense kind of anger that she's trying to work through, and having some of the impressions of the United States that she had. How do you support your clients in navigating those? And how do you build rapport with clients who've had negative experiences with their journeys? I think as you guys are all are thinking, something that comes to mind for me is validating the experiences and just honoring um, their understanding and their perception during that time, during those experiences, and always trying to create a safe space for them to explore all of the emotions that come up and for me to be different than what their experiences are. So even if it's one opportunity that they've had to feel safe or feel seen or feel heard, that rapport building for me is really vital in creating a different experience for migrants and refugees. So some of the things in the chat, validating their feelings and discussing what helps them move forward to find radical acceptance. I love this word radical because it means for me unapologetically, it means accepting in all contexts, right? Having really concrete psychological flexibility. I love this idea about radical acceptance. Thank you for sharing that, Heather. Validating versus dismissing the experiences. Yeah, I think there is such a culture to kind of, because we don't understand, it's so easy to dismiss other people's experiences, no matter how big or small. And so being very aware of our tendency to do that and just move into validation. Yes, I understand. And even if you don't understand, I hear what you're saying. Esther shared, keep showing up. Yes. And breaking the idea of what they might fear in authority figures. Excellent. Respecting their cultural values and beliefs. Reinforcing our roles as service providers and providing them with whatever support they need, even if it's just sitting across from each other. Really, really good.
Can I add something to that?
Yes, please.
I mean, even just that experience that I had with Dr. Garcini, kind of validating my experience as a child, right? Navigating that new environment and feeling just her saying, I see you and I hear you and I see what you went through. That can be very healing, for the person that you're interacting with. As a provider, you have those opportunities. So I would say if you do have those opportunities, offering that to your clients, because I think it's trauma is so nuanced and the amount of trauma we carry sometimes is nuanced as well, and the things that can be traumatic. So having those moments with your clients, I think can be really, really powerful in their ability to process that experience.
Thank you for reminding
I love
us.
that comment, and if I may add, it's as clinicians or as researchers, we can remind ourselves that it's a dual process, right? That facilitating that space for someone else to heal is also our path to our own healing process.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I think part of the reason why I became so emotional is because Dr. Garcini, you were able to put yourself in Diana's shoes and maybe give her um, an identified support that she maybe didn't have at 10, 11, 12 years old. And so that resonated deeply as I reflect on my own kind of healing journey. So thank you for that reminder.
And to add to that, I think it also just highlights what we sometimes may think is traumatic versus what someone else is going to, share as traumatic. Because Diana could have shared that same story in a completely different setting,
Right.
and someone might have not, connected the dots that that's a moment that really stuck with her. And for her, that is a traumatic experience. And a lot of times, that's why I put in the chat to validate versus dismiss, because there's a lot of times where I've shared small little things, from my journey where people are quick to just be like, oh yeah, but then like look at where you are now, you're fine. But to really kind of take the time to ask your clients how specific experiences have impacted them versus just assume, oh, that must be a traumatic experience, or no, that's not going to be deemed as a traumatic experience. So
Right.
yeah.
Thank you for these reminders. I want to thank each and every one of you for being here and sitting in this space with us and just allowing us access to your very real and nuanced and personal lived experiences. I can wholly recognize that there must be some level of vulnerability and some level of tenderness surrounding sharing your experiences with us and using them as a learning opportunity for the rest of us. We want to thank you immensely and express our deepest gratitude for you all being able to share your hearts, your time, and your insights with us. Your dedication to this learning community does not go unnoticed, and it has affected me personally. I feel like I can say the same for the rest of us. So thank you so much to you, Dr. Mutsa, to you, Dr. Garcini, and to you, Mrs. Diana. Thank you.
Thank you for providing the safe space to do so, and for providing this opportunity to learn from each other.
So we have a few minutes to just check in with our audience and see if you all have any questions that you want to ask our panelists. If you guys are thinking about what to ask our panelists, I have a question that came in previously, and the question is for you all. How do we support staff that have trauma from their own migrant experiences? And how do we currently support newcomers or people experiencing other traumatic events?
Mine's really quick, and I'll share first if that's okay. Most of my time has been spent in education. So a lot of times students will come in carrying a lot of heavy things that they're going through. And it doesn't necessarily have to relate to the migration experience, but just any kind of heaviness that they're bringing into the classroom. And I think making space for that as an educator, being intentional on creating space for that, I think is really important. Something that I did in my classroom, I worked at a private Christian university, so I would do a prayer request folder for students that they can anonymously submit prayers about things that they're going, and we would all pray for them as a class. I would highlight a student every day and like let them kind of share a little bit about themselves if they were comfortable, to create a good dynamic classroom environment. And then also personally for myself, for navigating that is like making sure I'm seeking therapy and creating a space for that for myself, because a lot of times, I would come home from being with my students, and some of the students were going through very difficult things in their lives, and it would trigger something that I remembered from my own experience. And my husband would oftentimes just come into the house and hold me and listen to me crying about these things. But making space for that for myself, like making therapy therapy really intentional and setting that as like a weekly thing or a bi-weekly thing, just so I can process those things. And also knowing how to set those boundaries for myself has been really important because, students do come in with things, and not just students, sometimes even the peers that I would interact with at work would share something with me. And knowing how to empathize without fully diving into their pain. And I think that's something for me that I struggle with, is if somebody shares something difficult with me, I kind of like take on all their pain and I'm like processing it as my own. So learning those kinds of strategies has been really important. So therapy to highlight.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's really important. A huge advocate for personal therapy. So
Yeah.
moving on, just to summarize kind of our discussion today and thinking about takeaways and reflections, just that there is always an opportunity to sit in a space and learn from people and collect data from people who have lived experiences. I think this is such a humanistic and critical way that we can learn to evolve beyond our own circumstances. Another kind of takeaway that came up was really understanding the impact of how age plays a role in a migration experience. We had very palpable examples that these three ladies shared with us that really demonstrate kind of how that can affect a person. And then finally, really understanding that collaboration and sharing strategies can really support us in surviving those experiences. So moving on to a couple of closing reminders, we have a survey that we'd ask for you all to fill out. Really, the purpose of this survey is to gather data for effectiveness and areas that we can improve. We're really interested in growth opportunities, and so please provide us with any and all feedback surrounding this experience for you all. Some next steps to consider. We will have a part 2, and if we didn't get to answer your questions or if you didn't get to share something that you wanted to share, we will have a part 2 where we will dive deeper into the stories of these three ladies. We're going to address specifically in that session our post-migration experience, and we're going to learn actionable strategies to support migrant and refugee resettlement. We're also going to continue to hear from our panelists, and they're going to share specifically how they overcame those experiences. Please utilize the resources we've provided and stay connected for future meeting topics, and continue to collaborate for support and service provision. Our next session is on August 11th. Is that correct? 13th. Okay, at 3 p.m. Central, August 13th at 3 p.m. Central. Again, please stay connected and utilize each other for support to share your own reflections and additional resources post-session. Did I hear that someone wanted to say something?
It's 1:30 Central.
1:30. Thank you. These time zones are tricky for me. Okay, August 13th at 1:30 Central. I'll say that again, August 13th at 1:30 Central. And please, for those of you who did not RSVP for today's session, if you could please register. If you register, then you will get invites and reminders for session 2. So please don't forget to register. Here, our survey link is in the chat. And we're here to help. Here's our website. And if you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out. Again, thank you to our panelists for sharing this space with us. And thank you to our participants. This was really a tremendous opportunity. So thank you.